right, good afternoon, everybody. Tommy Young sitting in here with you for today's live drive at 5. And as we have been advertising and letting everybody know on Facebook, we're going to dedicate the 5 to 6 o'clock hour today to the upcoming TSPLOST 1 cent add-on to our sales tax, which will be voted on by you, the citizens, on July 31st. And in the studio with me right now are Jeff Lewis and Barry Loudermilk. Good afternoon, gentlemen, and I'll let y'all do a little intro and bio for those who don't know who you are, and that way they'll know who you are when you're talking.
Well, Jeff just told me to go first because everybody knows who Jeff Lewis is. So, you know.
I'm deferring to my more senior statesman.
He had seniority over me in the House all the time we were serving together. But from my understanding, we're talking about the Tommy Young Tax Act of 2010. Is that right?
It begins with a T. It begins with a T, but it isn't Tommy. It's transportation.
Oh, so it's the Tommy Young Transportation Tax Act.
Is that Transportation what it is? Okay. Investment Act.
Oh, is that what it is?
There's a lot of T's that are going around here.
That's right. I'm Barry Loudermilk, a state senator in District 52 right now. Will be 14 after redistricting. But what do I need to say? I mean, how could I ever top what Jeff is going to say? You know,
well, you could do it easily, and I'll give you, I'll show you why. Because all I will say is I got to serve in the House for 16 years, and now I've just completed my first year of serving on the State Board of Transportation, and what a wonderful educational experience that has been so far. So I'm looking forward to this hour and catching up with my friend Barry, and even you, Tommy. Looking forward to catching up with you.
And I will say this about Jeff. I served in the House with Jeff for 6 years before I moved over to the Senate, and Jeff was one of our staunch conservative leaders and a good friend of mine. So we sat on the same side, on the far right side of the House chambers.
And this is an issue today where we agree to disagree. We're all friends, but we're in here because we want to share, you know, both sides of the spectrum here. We are Fox. We are fair and balanced. You know what I mean? So
you're going to report, and the people are going to decide. That is what you're saying.
Well, they're going to vote, you know. But in a nutshell, what the Transportation Investment Act of 2010 provides a legal mechanism in which regions throughout the state have the ability to impose a 1% sales tax to fund needed transportation improvements within their region. And we are in Region 1. Is that correct, Jeff?
That is correct. I'll make one language correction. The regions will not be imposing this tax, as I understand the legislation. The state will, but it will be defined by regional boundaries.
Okay. Well, that's one of the areas of contention we're going to have here is who is the taxing authority here. Yeah. If it's the state, then it's unconstitutional the way this is done. If it's the regions, it's unconstitutional because there is no regional governing body. So that's one of the things we'll get into here.
Yeah.
I assume.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the northwest area of Georgia, including Bartow County, I believe it is 15 or 16 counties.
It's 15 counties.
Map here.
It's 15 counties.
Okay, but anyway, we're included in that. And one of the off-air debates that we've had, and Barry and I have talked about it, and Jeff and I have talked about it. One of the things that were really concerned me, Jeff, is it says here in the language of the bill, no counties or municipalities are permitted to be exempt from the tax if approved. After the 10-year period, a region can reinstate the tax through the same process as described above. And the way this is reading is that if it passes, let's say 14 of the 15 counties pass it and Bartow doesn't pass it, we're going to be taxed, but some of the local projects that are on this list will not be used.
Well, let me start from the last comment first, as I understand it. If, for example, in your scenario, Bartow fails to pass it and the other 14 counties do, the regional projects that have been identified in this region that touch and go through Bartow County will still go through Bartow County. That does not alter the existing project list at all. In fact, it does not alter the 25% local formula that comes back to each county. If Bartow votes against it, they will still get their share of the 25% that goes to local governments.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's kind of, I know, Barry, you had something to say about that earlier when you and I were talking about it.
Yeah, one of the big issues with it, and I'll agree with Jeff right up front, we need to do something about transportation funding. And I opposed this bill when it was coming through the House. I was on the Transportation Committee, and some of the objections that we're going to bring up here today, I brought up in committee, and many of the others, including some attorneys, agreed with me that there's some very serious constitutional concerns with the way this is being adapted. Under your scenario, if everyone, let's say 100% of the people, it's not going to happen, but if 100% of the people in Bartow County voted against this, they're still going to be obligated to pay this tax. Now, what you have is we're trying to define this, who is the taxing authority here? If it's the state that has a taxing authority, we have a constitutional issue because the Constitution prohibits the state from earmarking funds. We cannot earmark any dollars. The Constitution in paragraph 3 of Article 7, Section 1 says that all taxation shall be uniform upon the same class of subjects with it. Well, I'm getting to the wrong part there. I'm sorry. It's Section 3 basically says that all revenues collected from taxes, fees, and assessments for state purposes shall be paid into the general fund for the Treasury. That's been an accepted practice in the General Assembly is we cannot earmark monies. That was the reason that you had the constitutional amendment on the ballot for the emergency medical funds, the trauma care, because we were taking in money, but the only way it could be earmarked directly for trauma care was if it was a constitutional amendment, because we cannot earmark any monies. All tax dollars come in, have to go to the General Assembly, and that current General Assembly allocates through the appropriations process where it goes. So if the state is the taxing authority in this legislation, we're violating the Constitution because we're earmarking it directly to the Department of Transportation for road building.
And obviously this had to be brought up during the process of this bill going through both chambers at the Capitol and through committee and all that. I mean,
it was.
I mean, how could this meet the constitutionality?
Here's where it comes down to, because it's a play on words. All right, what the proponents of this, and Jeff wasn't in the General Assembly during this time, it came down to what's called a special district. The Constitution of the state of Georgia allows the creation of special districts, but the purpose of those special districts are allowing counties to create special districts within the territorial boundary of that county. So Bartow County could create a special district with the city of Cartersville and the city of Kingston and the city of Adairsville so that they could do sharing of tax revenues for road projects or whatever that they need to do. So that allows these special districts. What they did with this, and Governor Perdue was the driving force behind this, and this was brought up during our discussions in the Transportation Committee, and our legislative council opined on this, that this was a great concern, is that we're creating special districts that go outside the territorial boundaries of counties. So now if we're going to say, all right, the regions are taxing authority, now you got another constitutional concern, because now you're using tax dollars taken from one county being used in another county. So the only way this would be perceived constitutional is if the exact amount of tax dollars taxed in Bartow County went right back to Bartow County. But what you're going to have is, just like we have in education funding, you're going to have donor counties and you're going to have recipient counties. Those that have larger populations are probably going to be donor counties to those like Chattooga County that have smaller populations to build their road projects. That's where you get in the constitutional concern. Under the Constitution, because the Constitution lays out that, yes, through the home rule portion of the Constitution, a county can levy some taxes within that county, but it has to be used within the boundaries of that county. Okay. So what we're doing now is creating this somewhat government that's not a government. I mean, we're basically creating these regions without creating regions, and we're giving somebody a taxing authority.
Yeah, let's let Jeff respond to some of this that you said. I mean, Jeff, you served, as you mentioned earlier, 16 years in the General Assembly. What would be your response to what he just said?
Well, like Barry pointed out, I was not serving in the General Assembly at the time when this legislation was being heavily debated and ultimately passed. I was serving in the legislature when this concept first came up back in the mid-2000s, and originally the concept was everything from legislation that would allow 2 or more counties to group together to identify regional projects and tax themselves through a referendum of some nature. It went from that approach as far as a statewide approach. Now, politically, you couldn't get either of those extremes to be a political reality. So, in my observation, what we have before us today is something of a compromise between those two extremes, one being the very local approach to this solution, one being an all-encompassing statewide approach to this solution. With respect to the regions, there are 12 of these regions in the state, and they are identified as the regional development regions. They are identified in the state through statute, I believe. The state identifies the makeups of these regions. What this legislation speaks to me, in my observation as I read this, is by putting this measure on the ballot and identifying all the projects that own this, much like you do when a local SPLOST is considered, the government, in this case the state, is making a statute in essence, making a contract in essence through statute with the voters of the state of Georgia that if you do this, we will do this. So if it were to pass in those regions, this does not, as I read the bill, set up a regional government body, because the Department of Revenue, an existing state agency, collects that money, then remits it to the Georgia Investment and Finance Commission, who acts as the bank on this money until it's time to start drawing the money down to deliver those projects that have already been identified. So this is more of a contract in statute between the state and the voters if it were to pass, and it had to identify regions as boundaries. And that, of course, was a political compromise. I don't think there's any dispute on that part. But it does not set up, as I understand it, any type of new government authority on a regional basis.
And he's right, it doesn't. And that's one of the problems we have here. And of course, I would oppose setting up any type of regional government.
Sure, well, no one wants that.
But when the state becomes the taxing authority, under Article 7 of the Constitution, under its Taxation and Finance, Section 1, which is the power of taxation, Paragraph 3 is the uniformity classification of property assessment section, says all taxes shall be levied and collected under general laws and for public purposes only. Then it goes on and says all taxation shall be uniform upon the same class of subjects within the territorial limits of the authority levying the tax. So if the state is levying the tax, the territorial boundaries of the state are the state lines, which says that that tax has to apply equally and be used throughout the state equally. So what we're doing now is saying, okay, well, if Northwest Georgia wants to tax itself, the state is the taxing authority, well, we're going to let them tax themselves, and we're going to send that money there. That's where you get into the constitutional problem, because, one, the state cannot earmark. If the state is the taxing authority here, then all that money that comes in, constitutional, will have to go to the general fund and be appropriated. So there's a constitutional issue there. The second is now we're not uniformly passing tax policy. We're passing tax policy based upon regional boundaries that really don't exist. So we're kind of creating regional governments without actually doing it. And it's under this idea of these special districts, which, again, were designed to apply but within the boundaries of a county, between cities and counties. So this issue was brought up, and many of the attorneys agreed that it's going to take a very, very broad and liberal interpretation of the Constitution to make this fly. And I think it's going to fail in the courts, inevitably.
Well, everything that Barry said, I cannot disagree with. I mean, he's much more well-versed in the state constitution than I am, but I would say that those who would may make the case arguing against it being unconstitutional may point out the special district, I think, that exists between Fulton and DeKalb County with respect to Grady Hospital and with MARTA, because that is by definition, I think, a special district, but it's not contained wholly in one county. It spreads into another county. And there may be a couple other examples around the state in metropolitan areas. I'm just more familiar with that particular one.
Okay, just real quick, I want to remind everybody, it's 20 minutes after the hour of 5 o'clock, 5:20 in the afternoon. Live Drive at 5 with you today. We're having just a special hour dedicated to the upcoming TSPLOST vote on July 31st. All of you are going to be asked to vote, and hopefully you will go vote if you want to increase our sales tax by 1%, and we would go from 7% to 8%, and that 1 cent is going to go to help fund all these regional transportation projects. And in the studio with me, I have DOT Representative Jeff Lewis. He represents, of course, our area and the Northwest Georgia area, and State Senator Barry Loudermilk. So we're trying to give, again, both sides of the coin here and give y'all enough information where people can collectively try to make a good decision, just like you do when you vote on a candidate. You want to be informed. You just don't want to hear something or read something in the paper or something on the internet and come up with a decision at that time. Well, that's who I'm going to vote for. That's what I'm going to vote for.
And transportation funding's always been very contentious, because you have the metro area and the rest of the state. And like Jeff said, there was a lot of compromise going through with this piece of legislation, but this was one that Governor Perdue definitely wanted to get through, and this was brought up in many meetings, and pretty much both sides agreed that at best it's a gray area when it comes to the Constitution. But I think even those who are going to end up having to defend this in the courts are saying it's going to be a tough sell to get that liberal of a interpretation of the state Constitution, because it is such a large gray area, and with the fact that a county cannot opt out even makes it more difficult.
Could it, and this is a question to both of y'all, and you may or may not know this, but can it be challenged before the tax is collected?
No, there's no standing at this point.
Right.
Well, not before it's collected, but it's going to have to pass first.
Yeah.
And so if it passes in the ballot box, there will be lawsuits. And I've spoken to several in the state government. They know that they're already going to come.
And if it doesn't pass, there's no need to pursue a lawsuit.
Right. Then I saw some signs today around Cartersville. It says "Untie Atlanta."
You saw that around Cartersville?
I did.
Okay.
Saw it down 61 out near Woodland Hills Golf Course. And, and to me, that's not a very good sell up here in Bartow County, trying to push Untie Atlanta, that they're the ones that need to be, that need the money. And obviously Atlanta and Fulton County and all of them are in a completely different district than us. But, it's a lot of argument, Jeff, and this is obviously a question towards you, has been that the DOT is not accountable for all their money. They've had a lot of issues in the past where they've had a lot of money that wasn't accounted for, and a lot of projects that were on the books that they didn't know about and things like that. I know a lot of that has been cleaned up. But as you well know, that kind of reputation can hurt when you try to go to the taxpayers of the state of Georgia and say, we need more money for these projects.
Well, of course it can, but several points to make on that. First, it's not the DOT asking for this. We're just the agency that will be in charge of delivering most of those projects if it were to pass.
I understand, but you're advocating for it.
Well, of course we're advocating for it because we know the road need out there is dire. And it's dire for safety reasons, congestion mitigation, and economic development. And those are needs that if we don't meet, somehow this state risks going the way of Mississippi or urban Detroit. And that's a real threat. I know a lot of people don't want to believe that or choose not to, but that's where we are with this. And I see firsthand the dire need of transportation improvement out there in the state. The money, the motor fuel tax that comes to the DOT right now is nowhere near enough to cover all the areas we need to cover, nowhere near it. But we're not the only state in that situation. All the other 50 states are too. But through this act right here, of this TSPLOST, we're the only state right now to date that is doing something to try and solve their problem of this magnitude. But to your point on this stereotype, of course there's been some issues in the past, but I can say, at least in the past year and even in the past 2 years, the DOT has really, like you say, cleaned up this act. We can account for practically every dime that comes through that agency. We know where every project is, and we know what state each project is in as far as start to finish. We know that. A lot of the reports in the Atlanta media you see are just false. They're not correct at all. And I would argue, as long as I draw breath, to that end. Number two, in this particular legislation, the Department of Transportation never handles this money. As I mentioned earlier, if it passes, the money is collected by revenue. It is then remitted to GISFIX, the Investment and Finance Commission. They hold that money until the moment comes to draw down a need for either right-of-way acquisition or construction. And they only draw it when there's actual need for it. It's only remitted then. So the DOT doesn't handle this money at all.
Well, I understand that part of it, but I mean, as far as the projects go, I mean, y'all are the ones that are voting on the projects. And I know the county commissioners and the mayor.
We're not voting on the projects. The projects have already been identified. It was your local government officials that identified all of these projects, not the DOT. All we did was assist them with some software and technology. When they identified a particular area, we got right down to the detail of it and said, all right, from point B to point A is where you're saying you want this to be on the regional list to improve. And they either confirmed that or didn't. This was 100% selected by local governments, local elected officials.
Okay. Barry, go ahead.
Well, I'm going to quote one of Jeff's former opponents. I agree with Jeff. I don't know if you remember Jeff in the debate with the opponent, and every question was, I agree with Jeff. Most everything Jeff said, I agree with. We have got to have more transportation funding, but the thing is, we have to have something that is going to stand up in court. What I'm confident that's going to happen if the courts go the way that I believe they should go, which I think they will, because this is going to be struck down. We're going to be back at square one. We could start sooner by just let's throw this out at the ballot box and go back and come up with a plan that is going to work. One of the, it goes back to issues that we've had, and Jeff's right. They are cleaning up the act as far as oversight, and I'm glad Jeff is on the board. I think he's brought fresh new ideas to the board and some accountability, and Jeff is a true conservative, and so I'm fully supportive of what Jeff is doing on the board. Let me just real quick go back to this thing about the regions and the special districts. This was so openly talked about in our transportation committee meetings that they knew that this was going to be the point of contention when this passed. And in the legislation itself, it says that this article, when it's talking about these special districts, says this article shall be construed liberally to achieve its purpose. So that was put in the legislation itself to say, hey, we're going to have to interpret this very liberally, or else it's going to be unconstitutional, which I think it's going to be anyhow.
Interesting. We got we're going to take just a short break, a GNN news break and weather break here at the bottom of the hour. It's coming up in about a minute. If you just tuned in, you're listening to Live Drive at 5 Special Edition. We're talking about the TSPLOST vote coming up on July 31st. Jeff Lewis, DOT representative in our region, is in the studio with me, along with State Senator Barry Loudermilk. We're going to be taking calls after the news. If y'all want to call in and ask a question, do so at 770-382-1270, 382-1270. And if you're for it, we'd love to hear from you. If you're against it, we would love to hear from you as well. And, I'm going to, hey, caller, are you there right now?
Yes, I am.
Well, listen, we're going into a break right now, and I want to give you enough time to make your comment. Do you want to hold, or do you want to call back?
I'll hold.
Okay, I'm going to put you on hold. Hang on. All right, and we'll be right back after the news. And Jeff and Barry, I appreciate y'all taking the time to be in here. I want to go over some of these county projects that are on this list when we come back and let everybody kind of know, in case they haven't looked it up. But anyway, you're listening to Live Drive at 5, News Talk AM 1270, WYXC. Tommy Young sitting in here with you today for Shady Grady, and we'll be back right after the news. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Live Drive at 5 special edition today, talking about the upcoming TSPLOST one-cent add-on to taxes. And we're going to get into the nuts and bolts in just a second.
Hello?
Hello? Goodness. Somebody's just trying to be funny in here. We're sitting here trying to talk about something serious, and he's over here kidding around.
We can call him Barry the Cable Guy.
Yes.
Oh, that was, come on now, that was Andy Griffith from No Time for Sergeants. You got to catch up with that, you know?
Yeah. I guess I was going to say, Will, we're going to be in the infantry.
That's right.
All right. We do have a caller, and let's go to the phone lines. Hey, we appreciate you staying on hold during the break. And who's on the line with us?
This is Alex.
Hey, Alex, how are you?
Doing well. First off, I want to thank both gentlemen for their service that they've done for our state. But my concern is, here locally in Bartow County, we've got 2 special option taxes. Am I correct?
Yes.
You have one for the school and one for the county.
That's right.
Special project. Correct?
That's right. Yes, sir.
Now, how long... I mean, it's been so long, I can't even remember when they were first established because they keep getting voted in.
Yes, sir.
Now, excuse me, we're looking, say, take the constitutional fact out of it, and it does get passed. And it is won in the court, and this is established. What's going to happen in 10 years when there's projects that are going on? And are we going to have to say, look what we've gotten started. We really need that 1 cent sales tax again for another 10 years. Is there a stop? Okay, once 10 years done, then it won't be voted on again until the next election cycle.
Well, caller, this is my understanding of it, and of course I'll defer to Barry because he actually served in the Senate during the time this legislation was done. But my understanding of this, if it passes, the tax can only be collected for a period of not more than 10 years or until the monetary goal in this particular region is met, which is over 10 years about $1.48 billion. If that money amount is reached in, say, 8 years, then the tax stops there. But if it takes 10 years, that's when it stops. And further, my understanding of the bill, if it were to continue beyond the 10 years or when the money is reached, it will have to go through essentially the same process that it's going through now, voter referendum ultimately.
Right.
And Jeff is right on that, except, and here's where you get the catch-all. This is just general legislation. This isn't a constitutional amendment. It's a kind of an unusual thing that we're putting it on a ballot, that we're not a referendum state, but we're doing a referendum here.
Right.
Because this is general legislation, the Constitution also says that one legislative body cannot constrain a future legislative body. So if this thing passes, the next General Assembly could go in and could simply strike that 10-year, and this is a perpetual tax.
That's right.
So any legislative body can go in and change any part of this general law without any input, without it going out for a referendum. So that's another dangerous aspect is, yes, you vote this in, then it's totally up. The General Assembly can make any change to this legislation as it goes forward.
And see, and that's what concerns me, and this isn't a pick on either one of you gentlemen here in the studio with us. You've seen, I have never seen a tax created that has sunset. Never. They always find, you got a group of basically a huge amount of lawyers that are down at the Capitol, and then they put all this together, and they find loopholes in it, and they find a way to manipulate around the law and go, well, just like what you were saying earlier, Alex, you've got a project that is a regional project, a Highway 20, let's use that for example, or 411, and it's 80% from being completed, and it sunsets in 10 years. And they say, you know what, but if we don't do something, that road isn't going to get finished. We got to figure it out. We can't rely on the voters to approve this again for 10 years. We need it for 3 more years, and we can get these projects completed. That's what scares me the most. And Alex, is that kind of what you were alluding to?
Yeah, that's exactly what. Because back at the local level with these special option sales tax that we have here in Bartow County, it seems like it gives them a blank check, per se, to say, let's build this, civic center or this community center. Let's go build this and get all these projects sort of started because they know or they can sort of anticipate that, well, we're going to get this passed again, so let's just keep, there's no restraint. We as American citizens, our government needs to have more restraint in what they do with the dollars that we send them.
Right.
Okay?
Alex, I appreciate that. You want to wrap up your comment? I'm going to open up the phone lines for any more callers, and I'll let them answer your question. Do you have anything else you wanted to add?
That's it. I appreciate y'all's time.
Hey, man, thanks a lot. Appreciate the call.
Let me at least address the last part of what you were saying. You know, exactly what Barry was saying is true. Your concern is right on. But that's where, and I think I can say this because I'm no longer a member of the General Assembly, but by and large, I have a confidence in our current General Assembly, largely because it's made up of a Republican majority, that something like this is going to be very difficult to pass as long as we have the Republicans in there. Granted, it could happen, but it's more difficult to happen. And so, with that, I'm not as concerned as about what Barry described could happen as I would be otherwise.
And I'll say this.
Let me take this call real quick, Barry, before you expand on that. But Republicans passed it and allowed it to be on the ballot.
Well, it's a referendum.
All right. Well, let's go to
referendum.
But they passed it.
Which we don't have a referendum provision in the Constitution, too. Let me bring that up.
Let's go to the phone lines. Hey, you're on Live Drive at 5. Who do we have on the line with us?
Jody.
Hey, Jody, you got a question for either Barry or Jeff?
Jeff, it's a question and more of an overall comment, and I hear that this will be the largest single tax increase in the history of the state of Georgia, should it be passed. And then my question is, we elected a body of who we thought were fiscal conservatives to run the state, and then we get this huge tax increase proposed by Republicans. Why can the government not live within its means like I have to and everyone else does?
Well, if I may, but let me just take a step. Caller, thank you for that. This is Jeff responding, and as it relates to this particular transportation project alone, if this does not pass, then practically speaking, what we will be living with in the state is approximately a $2 billion a year budget, of which we can only use about 3/4 of that because of our bonded situation issue to address our roads. The problem there is that is nowhere near enough money to take care of all the transportation concerns, i.e. roads and bridges in the state of Georgia. Now, that is something that you as a voter will have to gauge and see if it's of any value to increase your sales tax by 1%. But I will give deference to the lawmakers down there that they are ultimately leaving this tax increase up to you as a voter to determine. And that's what I appreciate about what the General Assembly did in this. They are giving me an option to elect this in or to vote against it.
Well, one of the issues with the statement there is it's hard to quantify is this going to be the largest tax increase in the state of Georgia? Well, it depends. If it only passes in one region, no. If it passes statewide, yes, it will be. So, and that's another issue with it is now you're talking about a tax that is for a particular region, which the Constitution says has to be uniform across the state. So, and the other issue is, the legislature kicked the can down the road. The Constitution does say the legislature is responsible for levying all taxes. I've always taken the approach that unless it's a constitutional amendment, we do not have a referendum-style government in the state of Georgia. It's the General Assembly that's supposed to take on that task. It's just such a contentious task. They said, hey, the only way that you could really get the votes to do this because of some of the fiscal conservatives down there was to them, which we know we have to have more transportation funding, no doubt, is say, okay, well, I'm not taking it on myself. I'm going to let the voters decide, so I'll vote for it because I want the people to have their voice. So, and I will say this, if it does pass, there's nobody I'd rather have down there watching the dollars than Jeff Lewis, because I know he's going to watch it very carefully.
Good, well said. Caller, do you have another question or comment?
No, it's just still incredibly disappointing. I mean, find the money from somewhere else, and I know it's put up for a vote, but you have the governor and politicians coming out supporting this, and it's just milking us dry. It's incredibly disappointing. Yeah. And I'm a lifelong conservative and totally disenchanted with the entire party.
Okay, I appreciate that comment, and thank you for listening and calling.
Well, I will say this in respect to that call. There are a number of conservatives that are opposed to this, that some that even voted for the bill that when they voted for it said, when I go to the ballot box, I'm going to vote against it. And many of them have even, because when this was first passed, it was supposed to be for congestion mitigation, and now it's turned into economic development.
Yeah. Okay. We got another caller. Let's go back to the phones. You're on Live Drive at 5. Caller, who's on the line with us?
This is Otto, Tim.
Hey, Tim. You got a question or comment for Jeff and Barry?
Yeah, I was just calling because when I first heard about this, I kind of did a little bit of research on it. And from what I saw on the map and what I read there on the government website, is that this was only going to go to Cobb and not into Bartow. So I'm just trying to figure out why we would be getting a tax increase if it's not going into Bartow, and then also if they've just changed it since it first came out. And I'll go ahead and get off the line so you guys can take some more callers. But,
okay.
Just go ahead and answer the questions. I'll turn on my radio.
All right, Tim. Thank you much. Appreciate your call.
Well, Tim, if I understood your question, I think your concern was that the money, we would be taxed in Bartow, but Cobb would get our money, if that's what I understood correctly. And I can tell you that's not the case. The money that is collected in the regions 100% stays in the region. So if Northwest Georgia does pass this, all the money collected and raised in Northwest Georgia stays in Northwest Georgia for projects there. Likewise, if Atlanta passes it and Northwest Georgia doesn't, then all the money collected in the Atlanta area stays in the Atlanta area. And that's the way it is around all the regions. So it stays in the area or the region that it was actually raised in for projects in that region.
Okay, I'm going to take this call. Hey, caller, hold on just a second. I want Barry to make a comment real quick you were making during the break, Barry. And caller, are you there with us?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on just a second. I want Barry to mention something. Barry, you were talking about tax reform.
Yeah.
In a bill that was passed, tax reform bill that was passed, and how this, if the voters do pass on July 31st, how it is going to affect the tax reform bill that the conservatives and Republicans just pushed through this year.
Yeah, one of the great things that we did this year, and of course there were portions of this bill I did not agree with, but for the most part, I thought it was heading in the right direction, is getting rid of an ad valorem tax, that birthday tax. I've been a proponent of getting rid of property taxes, ad valorem tax, because you never own anything in the state of Georgia because the state always has liens. One of the things we did is we eliminated the sales tax on automobiles, and we replaced it with a title fee, fee tax, whatever you want to, that fee eliminates your ad valorem tax. So you pay it one time, boom, you're done. You're not paying a sales tax and an annual ad valorem tax. In this bill, which again, this bill passed in 2010, so this was already out there. When we eliminated this past year, the sales tax, I was going back through this bill again, and all of a sudden I hit a section that I remember was a contentious issue when I was in the House going through this transportation tax, and basically this bill reinstitutes a 1% sales tax on the sale of automobiles up to the first $5,000. So we just eliminated in this last legislative session the sales tax on automobiles. If the voters pass this is going to put back a sales tax on automobiles. It's only going to be a 1% up to the first $5,000, but we will be undoing portions of what we just did. And so also there's been some misunderstanding on what is taxed in this. This is not a motor fuels tax. This does not, in fact, it exempts motor fuels tax. It exempts aviation fuel for airlines, not for private jets. But it does tax everything else that you pay sales tax on right now will go up another penny, including groceries and food, which...
Okay. It would be interesting to see which bill trumps which bill if both of these were.
Well, I checked and they said no, that this will trump what we just did.
Okay.
That this will reinstitute it.
All right, caller, what was your comment or question to Jeff and Barry?
Well, it's kind of a two-part question. First, for Senator Loudermilk, because he sounds very informed about the Constitution. Isn't transportation one of the constitutional responsibilities of state government?
It is.
Okay,
absolutely.
So based on what the representative has mentioned earlier about absence of a Plan B and the reason the mess will be in if we don't pass this. What we're essentially dealing with is the legislature trying to bail themselves out, but they're not actually coming out and saying, we've spent all the money on other things, and we need you to bail us out now. because we don't have any money to fix your road. Is that what this boils down to?
Well, caller, this is Jeff. If I may, Barry certainly will answer, but let me start out with an attempt. The way the transportation funding is in Georgia is by Constitution. The DOT is responsible for getting all of the state motor fuel tax and the federal motor fuel tax that comes back. The General Assembly really cannot take the motor fuel funds out of the Department of Transportation and direct it somewhere else. The General Assembly does have the authority to redirect priorities within the Department of Transportation, but it cannot take the money, it cannot take motor fuel money away from transportation, which is probably 99% of our money, but about almost $2 billion. So that money by Constitution must stay within the department for transportation. I hope that helps clear some of that up. But this problem, this overall problem we're seeing, I'll try to be very brief in this, is due to inflation over the past 30 years, we've seen the effectiveness of the motor fuel tax decrease, especially of late in the last 5 or 6 years when gasoline prices have gone up so high, people's driving behavior has changed, people are driving more fuel-efficient cars. We've seen the motor fuel tax diminish even greater. So the long and short of it is the motor fuel tax, as we collect it and apply it today, is not enough money to keep up with the transportation demand that exists out there. It's not only a Georgia problem, but it's a United States problem.
Okay, thank you. If I could, real quick, Tommy, just if I would like to hear the representative address if he's heard about the deceptive wording, kind of propagandized type of wording that's come out on the Cobb ballot, and I wonder if he knows anything about that. Is that a localized decision of how to word the referendum?
Well, my understanding that's from the Secretary of State's office, which again is another very liberal interpretation of some powers. The law does allow the Secretary of State on a constitutional amendment to write, you may call it a preamble, a summary of the ballot question that you're going to have. But this is not a constitutional amendment. This is a referendum, which is kind of unusual because we're not a referendum state. Well, the Secretary of State's office has, I think maybe they were confused, as a lot of people were confused, because we don't have referendums come on the ballot. This is very unusual that people are thinking it's a constitutional amendment. Well, under that scope, he's written a preamble or a summary that precedes the actual ballot question, and it's going to be statewide, my understanding, not just in Cobb, and it's going to talk about, do you want to pass this tax to create jobs and to spark economic development, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Exactly. So I think that is going to be a little bit deceiving because this, again, was supposed to be about congestion mitigation to start off with. Now it's turned into an economic development tool.
And this coming out of a Republican's office, which Jeff referred to earlier, as he would depend on these Republicans to do the right thing.
And in defense of the Secretary of State's office, I think there was some confusion, as a lot of people are confused. And, I'm going to try to defend the best I can that writing, and there's going to be questions brought up, I believe, in court as well, is whether that he has the authority to do this on this referendum. Is to write that preamble.
And, of course, my point of that, as a Republican myself, I much more trust Republican policymakers than Democrat lawmakers.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your
thanks a lot for calling, and thank you for listening. 770-382-1270. If you just tuned in, this is Live Drive at 5, special edition with the talking about the TSPLOST vote coming up on July 31st. In the studio with me are DOT Representative Jeff Lewis and State Senator Barry Loudermilk, trying to fill y'all in on all the nuts and bolts of this confusing piece of legislation. But ultimately, what you're going to be asked for on July 31st is, do you want your taxes increased? And that's what it's going to boil down to. And I know some of the arguments, Jeff, that has been made that, why can't we just stay on the same formula that we're on now? And I know your response to that, well, if you want to keep it that way, that's fine, but it's going to take us 4 times as long to collect that type of money. Mm-hmm. So this is to kind of give an infusion and jumpstart, I guess, to a lot of the projects that y'all see fit and the local government see fit to be done.
Yeah, well, it's the difference in delivering the projects within a 10 or 12-year construction period versus a 50 or 60-year construction period. Furthermore, by having all state-collected tax dollars used for these identified projects, and we don't have to rely on federal funds, we can reduce the cost of these projects on average by 25%, because anytime we use federal funds, we have to comply with federal regulations, everything from environmental to wages that are paid. If we remove the federal component, it will reduce the cost of these projects on average 25%, maybe more, because we can deliver it in a more efficient time manner. We don't have to comply with all those issues that the feds require, so we gain that way as well.
That's one of the two positives about this. Of course, to me, the negatives outweigh them. But one, we can cut the purse string ties to the federal government. I'm all for that. Reducing the regulation, we can build roads cheaper, we can build them faster. The other is that it is a consumption tax. But there has to be a right way of doing this. I think we've gone about the wrong way of doing this. I believe it's going to be thrown out in court. We're going to start all over again. The issues that Jeff brought up are real. The problem we have is the majority of the tax revenues that are brought in for motor fuels are not based on the sale price of the gasoline. They're based on a per gallon. It is 7.5 cents per gallon. It's more of an inventory tax than a sales tax, because it's collected at the distributor.
Right.
What I've proposed, and I've actually started working on legislation on this that I intend to propose this coming legislative session, is eliminate that 7.5 cents per gallon and go to some type of percentage. Now, you can make this revenue neutral. You can say, all right, what are we bringing in at 7.5 cents per gallon right now? It may be a 2% sales tax, but you are moving from an inventory to a consumption tax that will fluctuate with the cost of gasoline. Now, what that will do is it'll stabilize. It'll allow the DOT to project better, because as the cost of fuel goes up, their cost of building roads go up, and the cost of running government goes up. That's why we have those little trigger provisions the governor has been suspending, that is in the law, that says, once gasoline gets to a certain amount, then this additional tax is automatically triggered, and it's because we're based on that 7.5 cents per gallon. We need to make that to where it's a percentage. It goes more toward a fair tax type system. It does fluctuate as the price of fuel fluctuates. The other thing is, everybody traveling from the north down to Florida that's coming through Georgia is going to help participate in that, because they are big users of our road system as well. So that's one of the things that we're going to be proposing this coming legislative session, is a way that we can still bring in the revenue to cut our ties to the federal government. It may take a little more tax dollars by the citizens of Georgia. And I'm definitely not a more tax guy, but if I could personally pay another cent and get rid of the constraints put on us by the federal government, that'd be a pretty good deal.
That would be good, because we miss out on their compliant issues, and I can't tell you how much that cost us in both money and time to deliver necessary projects.
And it was a very good point. All right, guys, we got about a minute left here. Just any kind of summary? Do you want to summarize this before we go to the polls on the 31st? Jeff, go first.
I would just encourage all your listeners and all your voters out there to look at this issue. Go on the websites, go into the DOT websites, follow the links of all this will do, because I think, in my personal opinion, the benefits outweigh the criticisms that go with it. Sure, Barry mentioned there's some very legitimate issues that need to be addressed in this. This is not a perfect piece of legislation by no means, but it is a solution right now to our road problems. I think it is very worthy of your consideration.
All right, and Barry?
We got to do something about transportation. The thing is, if we pass this in part of the state, if it fails throughout the state, we can start at the beginning of next legislative session and come up with something that works. If it passes, we're going to be in court. It's going to get thrown out. We got to start over again, and we may miss a whole year doing it.
All right, guys. Great information today. I appreciate both of y'all being in here with us. Jeff, thank you very much. Barry, thank you for sitting in here, and thank y'all for listening, and thank you for the callers. Great discussion. It's going to be interesting to see what happens on the 31st, not only with county commissioner and all the other races. And then we got Bartow Sports Showcase coming up next. I'll be sitting in for John Underwood today, and I've got another